All right. Good evening, everybody. Hope everybody out there is doing well. As Patrick had just given the intro here, so it's my turn to do our the list of testimonials here. So tonight, what I want to go through is just three of many stories and experiences I've had in my life to this point. Just kind of share those with you guys, just because I think um, you know what, even though that you guys have grown up are growing up in a time very different than when I grew up, 15 20 years ago now, and then different from previous generations, that the more things change, the more things still the same, stay the same, I think, in a lot of ways. So hopefully you guys will be able to kind of relate, at least in part, to some of what I'm saying. And if you can't, try to kind of stay with me, especially since I know some of you guys, especially the older guys out there, girls and guys out there, have probably heard at least one, if not more than one of these stories I'm going to share with you guys tonight before. But without further ado, so here we go. Um, and I will say this too. So with all these stories we've got, or I've got, I'm going to share. There are three of them. Like I said, three of many, but they all took point or place rather three crucial times in my life. Where, of course, at that time I didn't realize how crucial they were, but really kind of looking back now, these three events really shaped my life immeasurably, and that's why I really chose these three in particular. Um, so it's kind of jumping right in. And well, actually, before I jump in, I will say, particularly even starting off on this first one, not super positive experiences, but I think that's also because, I wanted to share those in part because, life is tough. And I think that's something we all need to learn how to deal with, even from a young age. So that's certainly what this first one is about, which actually takes place starting in the fall of my eighth grade year. When I was at McCants Middle School, I was still, attending Trinity at that time. Actually, I would have my whole life. But one of my very best friends during that eighth grade year actually was in a accident, and died in that accident. She was riding her bike in her neighborhood, and a car did not see her and hit her, and unfortunately, she passed away in the accident. A lot of you guys probably have heard me talk about her before. Her name was Molly. She was part of our youth group here at Trinity, and like I said, one of my very best friends. Total tomboy, just all kinds of fun. We were in band together, in youth group together, had different classes together. Their neighborhood was like on the other side of mine, like kind of connected the back of my neighborhood, so we spent a lot of time together. um, Awesome person. So um, but anyway, so at the day after she died, kind of that first day, shocking. I'd never been through anything like that in my life before. But I don't remember if it was a call my parents got or I got or what. But Chris Lynch, our youth director at the time, gathered everybody in our youth group together. I think in place of, no, I'm sorry, actually, yeah, probably would have been in place of our youth group that night. And we just kind of met just to kind of grieve and comfort each other. We talked, we shared stories about Molly, we cried, we laughed. There was a lot of crying, as you would certainly imagine, for much like middle and high school students, much less adults that, you know, maybe know more about dealing with that than we do. But at the time, I had no clue. Um, but just being, an eighth grader, like I said, never been through that, unexpected, untimeliness of her death. I didn't even know where to turn. And just although that wound for me is still open now, I don't think it'll ever completely heal. Just one of my best friends, and just losing her as I did, I think that'll always go with me. Certainly has, since then. But really, that first meeting, and then just being around our youth group, people that were going through the same pain and hurt I was. Not that we want anybody else to experience that, but with that, it was somehow the beginning of healing for me. And at that time, I don't know if I really realized that or not. But looking back, I certainly know that was big for me. That was a big step, just starting that. And then kind of part two of the story. Um, the day after this happened, Molly's parents actually asked me to be one of the pallbearers at her funeral. Which, if you guys don't know what that is, a pallbearer is usually one of 6 or so people that usually will carry the casket at someone's funeral. So here I was. I don't know if I'd barely attended a funeral period in my life to that point, maybe one or two, but certainly never done something like that, much less for one of my best friends, who just a few days earlier was, talking and joking and laughing with. Just immeasurably hard. And frankly, it just made me extremely nervous because all I wanted to do was sit there in that service and just bawl my eyes out. But I knew just that's not something she would have wanted. She wouldn't have wanted me to sit there and just cry over her because that's not the person she was. But I also wanted to be strong for our friends and her family, particularly for her family, just because I knew. And actually, I don't think I still know how hard that would have been for them. Um, but that moment, that singular moment, really taught me a lot about how to be strong in the face of grief and pain. And certainly over the years, I've learned that, dealing with her loss at such a young age, it gave me a small taste of reality. But more importantly, it really showed me the importance of having a Christ-centered community that I can rely on. And I've really come to, really rely on our church family, on other friends that are Christians, just more times than I can count. Obviously on Patrick, on Whitney, on all of our counselors, on a lot of you guys even. So that, just having that is immeasurably important for me. And I would really hope you guys, kind of learn and know the same. And I'll even add to that that was really probably the first time in my life where I had that thought of how in the world could I get through this time without God in my life? I really kind of stopped and had that thought one day. I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was sometime probably in the days or weeks after she died. And, I was like, wow, okay. So, at this point, I definitely professed to be a Christian and obviously went to church and did all that stuff. But, it's one of those things of, that's a tough moment. A lot of moments. But relying on God there and putting hope and faith and trust in Him, really, I felt like got me through that experience, to where the pain was more manageable and more manageable, as it's gone over time. So the next story I have to share, is a few years later. It kind of starts just a few weeks after I graduated high school. And anybody that knows me knows that I'm not very good with change. So transitioning from high school, going to college, leaving the youth group where I was very comfortable and familiar by that point, many of my friends going away to college, and not to mention my girlfriend and I at the time, or my girlfriend at the time and I breaking up, all that really threw me for a loop. And I went, weeks, or even, multiple times a day for weeks on end, where my mood would just change drastically from, even hour to hour, multiple times a day, where I would be happy and sad and angry. And frankly, I just felt deflated. I really did. I felt deflated a lot of the time. So after a couple months of this, my parents just knew that I just wasn't coming out of this funk, and they just wanted to see what was going on. So I went and saw a doctor, actually was referred to another doctor, who then diagnosed me with depression. And for me, putting that label on there made this even worse for me, because now at 18 years old, not only was I now on medication, I was seeing a therapist, and I officially labeled myself as crazy. Of course, little did I know that, as I learned more and more about this disease, what caused it, and that wasn't really crazy, which, side note, is a horrible term to use. Coming from my later days as a psychology major, the term crazy is just horrible because it's not descriptive at all of what mental health is about and the types of diseases, that kind of thing. But Little did I know there that God would draw me closer than ever to Him over that time, over that experience in my life. So over the next coming months, many times since as well, I had sleepless nights where all I did was just basically stay up all night and I would talk with God. I mean, it was definitely prayer, but to me, like I wouldn't at the time I wasn't looking at it as praying so much. At least most of the time, I was just sitting there, just basically in a dark room and laying in my bed, just talking to God. Sometimes in my head, sometimes verbally. I would talk to Him. I would listen to Him. Sometimes I yelled at Him, and then sometimes I would just cry. Frankly, I cried because I hated feeling depressed. I hated that feeling. I was so scared of the unknown. I was still scared of all this transition and change in my life, which was a big part of all of this that kind of set off a chemical imbalance in my brain, which is a very basic description of what kind of depression is and what causes it. Um, and above and I think beyond all that is I cried because I was just so overwhelmed by God's presence in this time. I've heard Patrick say before that he's heard God audibly speak to him, which I don't know a lot of people can actually say, but he believes that, and I absolutely believe that he has. I can't say that I've heard God's voice, not like the thundering voice from heaven kind of thing, but I've certainly seen Him work in my life and heard Him in those dark nights alone in my bed at night. So, and not to mention plenty of other times. But I would say more than anything, that time in my life just taught me, well, honestly, more things than I can count, but probably more than anything, it taught me about who God is, how big He is, and that He can handle anything that I throw at Him. Like I said, I spent a bit of my time just yelling at God, just being mad about, why are you making this so hard for me? Why am I going through this? Why can't I just be, quote unquote, normal and, just be excited about starting college and getting into my classes and doing all this other stuff and moving all of my life, from high school and going in this next chapter of my life. And it was just so hard for me. So, the big thing there again is just that God can handle it. And I've learned that more and more over the years since then too, because I mean, our God is amazing, amazingly big, and He can take it. But that is probably my biggest takeaway from that whole experience, which I still struggle with. Whitney can tell you, my other friends, and my parents can tell you, there's still times where I struggle with that. Definitely not like that first time around. I've learned coping skills and other things like that to this point. But there are times in my life, whether it be a day or two here or there, or even a week or more, sometimes where I'm really, kind of will get depressed, and it manifests itself in different ways for sure. But just that reliance on God is really huge for me. So the final story I kind of want to go into with you guys takes place about a year after this whole event with being diagnosed with depression. I had thankfully kind of found like a more stable ground by this point. I got through my freshman year of college, and then it had settled in basically. Life was a little bit more back to normal, if you will. But excuse me. Um, anyway, so we're fast forward about a year later, and this one is actually about another friend who was actually very good friends with both Patrick and I. He was also a part of our youth group here at Trinity, and his name is Joel. And even though we were immature teenage boys there in high school, just like most teenage boys are, I really did see the Lord work in Joel during high school. I really did. From the time I met him in late middle school to by the time we graduated high school, and definitely in between, there was a big change in his heart and his mind, just like there was with me. I mean, the Lord certainly worked in me and a lot of our friends during that time. And I would almost dare to say none more than him, at least in certain aspects. But after we graduated high school, Joel kind of fell in with a rough crowd, and we mostly lost touch for a while. But one night, Joel and several others actually made a really bad decision, and they got into a car with someone who was drunk driving. Um, I won't go into the details, but they were in an accident. Joel and another girl were thrown from the car. The girl died, and Joel should have. Uh, the doctors did not think that he would make it. They were actually, if I remember correctly, surprised he even made it to the hospital. But um, many of us actually, I remember Patrick and I and Amber and I'm sure the McCoys are probably there, and several others. A bunch of friends, bunch of family. Actually went over to Greenville Memorial where he was in the hospital a few times, actually, just so um, really we could say goodbye. He was in a coma, so we couldn't talk to him. He couldn't respond to us, anything like that. But just so we would be able to say goodbye to him after this horrible accident. And really, from that point, is one of the few times in my life where I would definitely say that I really saw a miracle. And I couldn't tell you all the medical kind of background on it, but basically, Joel regained consciousness, and he was in the hospital for months, and then he came home to his new reality. Um, Joel was now a quadriplegic, which means he lost the use of all four of his limbs, and he also couldn't speak due to damage he had sustained to his vocal cords. He had to relearn how to do everything in his life. He had to rely on everybody else to do everything for him, essentially. And he even had to learn just new communication skills. He, at least early on, he had to learn the system of communication where he uses like a series of blinks with his eyes and like looks with his eyes just to communicate, and essentially would spell out words and give command or responses based on that. So just a huge obviously thing for him in his life. But a big thing, and I saw this immediately the first time I went to his house after he got out of the hospital, was that he was alive, and that was enough for Joel. He actually told me that first time I went and saw him about a vision that God gave him while he was in the hospital, and he realized God's call for his life. It was then he decided to recommit himself to Christ. He really became a person full of life, even from his bed in his wheelchair. He became really full of life again, even more so than when we were in high school. And anybody that knew him knew that he was a cut up. He's a class clown, always having fun. Just anything fun and loud and kind of rambunctious. That was him. Video games and stuff. That was all him. But he definitely was a different person, but I think in an awesome way. And he went on to living a crazy, awesome life. I think in a weird way. He even actually reconnected with and married his high school sweetheart, Lauren. And Joel and Lauren's story was actually posted on social media at some point, got picked up by some news stations, and they were even on a national TV show. What I took away from all that was that he really became a light in the world. Like I said before, shining brighter than he ever did before. Joel and Lauren were able to reach thousands of people through their story, and he was able to share with them that God had saved his life and for a purpose, and that God had a purpose in his life and was able to show people that. It was I think almost like a second chance to end all second chances, kind of. And he really, in my opinion, made the most of it. Unfortunately, Joel did pass away last year, actually, after suffering complications from a surgery he had. My friend showed me that all you have to do is really, give the best you've got with whatever you've got. And that can change people. And then moreover, in that entire situation, God showed me that prayer and hope through prayer is unbelievably powerful. I actually had, multiple conversations with him after that accident, kind of on that topic, and just amazing to see God work in someone's life, where he could have easily been, you know, he could have been obviously super mad at God, and I'm sure was at certain points, and that, they left him like this, but he chose to see the good in that he was alive, that God had saved him for a purpose. Um, but in closing tonight, I guess to kind of put a small bow on this, particularly with this last story, I kind of want to leave you guys with a question that Joel's father, called him Big Joel, Joel Senior, posed to the crowd at Joel's wedding when him and Lauren got married several years after this. Um, and he kind of was given like a toast at the reception, but he was really showing the way I heard it was gratitude to his son for fighting for his life, to Lauren just for sticking by him, or coming back to him after this, and really to God for being who he was, or who he is. And what he said was, um, I know how big my God is, and how big is your God. Um, and I could go on and try to answer that question, but it would not do the question justice, and it would not do God justice. So I'll leave that there, kind of let you guys answer that question for yourselves. And I would encourage each of you to continue to ask yourselves that question, not just tonight, but in the days and weeks coming ahead. And I know I still ask myself that question all the time, and I am constantly amazed at the answer that God gives me about how big He is. So that's just a few stories that are kind of about me and what shaped me in my life, and what God has done in my life and for me. So without further ado, I will close this out in prayer, and then I'm going to kick it back and see if we have anything else. Dear Father God, we just thank you for who you are, just for how big you are. Even we don't understand that you can take a rough experience like something that Joel went through, and do wonderful things with it. You can take something like pain at the loss of a friend, of a family member, and use that for your good, even through the pain and the grief that we feel and we don't understand as human beings. Um, that you have a plan that's bigger than that for us. You take things like disease, and you turn it into a learning experience, to something to glorify you, Lord. And you give us opportunities where we don't understand, many times for a long time, uh, what the purpose is, or what we can do with it. But if we're patient and rely on you and hope in you and have faith in you, that you will do wondrous things with us, through your power. And in my prayer for everyone listening to this tonight is just that they would ask themselves these questions about how big you are constantly, and just to learn more about you, and constantly seek you and your power and your glory. And we just ask all this in your name. Amen.